I just want to introduce Michelle. If I don't know if everyone knows you, but I know you all know it's been announced that Michelle is our first high impact teaching fellow, or one of the first, and has agreed to share one of her high impact teaching practices in which she uses movies to provide real life examples as well as to engage students. So thank you, Michelle, for being the first to do a spotlight for us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much to everyone for coming. I appreciate it. I am Michelle Brodke, and I teach at Firelands College and also for the College of Business. And at the College of Business, I teach for the DODC program. That's Organization Development and Change. So a big part of the role of using movies is to allow interactions to play out so that students can follow them. So let me share my slides and I will get right to it. So here we go. All right. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk about movies, but an important reason for using movies for me is I needed students to share a frame of reference. When I teach, I need for the students for it to be fun, right? So that we can all be engaged and enjoy talking about concepts that maybe aren't things you would naturally discuss over your kitchen table, but if you have kind of a shared frame of reference, it becomes more entertaining and everyone can join in to understand what you're presenting. So typically my preferred approach is to actually have students engage in a real world project, and I've done quite a bit of that, but it's not always practical. So for large classes or evening classes or other kinds of things, you just can't do a real world project. You need for students to be able to share a frame of reference without actually going out to a client site. And movies have provided that for me. So some important benefits. The key one is sharing a frame of reference so we can all come from the same kind of place. It provides many more detailed course examples. So we'll talk about that in a second, but typically textbook examples, if students are willing to read the offset shaded example in a course, they won't necessarily get the full impact of it. And movies, because they are presented as stories and have emotionally laden content, they draw you in and get you to join in the experience in ways that a textbook does not. Some of the challenges are costs, if costs are associated, and we'll talk a little bit about how to get around some of that. The time, keep in mind that students may not enjoy the movies as much as you, and they will consider those movies to be part of the time they spend on the course. For me, with the DODC students and at Firelands, I typically have non-traditional students in my classes, and they will definitely let you know if course time is exceeding what their expectation for it was. Also, making sure that you help students make the link of how the movie is relevant to the course. That is important, and we'll talk about some strategies for doing that as well. Just because you see everything, all the concepts and situations that your textbook is discussing doesn't mean that the students will necessarily make that connection unless you help them a little bit. So, importance of a shared frame of reference, it makes it fun for me is an important thing I didn't list here, but students often have only worked in one type of situation, or many students haven't worked at all. For me, I've worked service jobs, entry-level jobs in fast food and in hotel environments. I've worked in corporate environment. I've worked in a mom and pop environment. So I have a much broader array of experiences to draw on to help them understand course concepts. In order to bring them along, you need to try and provide that similar kind of breadth of experience so that the concepts don't just seem, you know, theoretical or not applicable. Once they're able to have a shared frame of reference, then they're able to see how they're applied. And it helps when all students see the same thing. So they can play off each other. So the experiences then aren't disparate, where I saw this, oh no, well, I was in a different circumstance and saw a completely different thing. Here they have all the same shared experience and they can contribute to it. Plus, since it's a movie, they don't have to reveal anything about their own personal experience. So if you have shy students, or you want to talk about maybe a touchy kind of thing, like a bad boss event or a failure at work, it's easier for them to talk about it when you can say, here's an example from a movie. How was this a failure? Why was this boss a bad boss? That kind of thing. So a challenge is always helping students jump from the information in the textbook or in your notes to being able to apply it in real life. And this is a real benefit of using movies, because the characters portray a whole hopefully a fully fleshed out person, and not a real life environment, but in a reasonable facsimile environment. So students can follow, right? Is this person, if we're talking about personality development in an organization behavior class, so is this person displaying conscientiousness? And then how will that likely relate to their ability to get promoted or get good performance reviews? And how does it influence judgment about that person when someone's very extroverted and assertive as opposed to more introverted? So it provides a much more detailed, much richer example than typically, in my experience, is available through the book. Also, when you have characters interacting with each other, the students can follow how a person has this characteristic and it's perceived in one way by a given character and maybe perceived differently by another character, or that characteristic is changing how they're perceived over time. I'm going to talk about the movie Crash in just a bit, and that was a award winner from 2004. It addresses a whole slew of issues, positive and negative, around racism and nepotism and promotion issues and corruption and all kinds of things. It provides a really valuable insight to how a character's strength in one situation then becomes a weakness in another. And watching how that plays out is really useful to students. And since it's a movie, it actually plays out within the time allotted for the course. So this is one particular area where a real life project doesn't do as well as a movie would allow. Because typically when we're at a client, we only see a particular type of interaction, typically very formal, but a movie will take you to follow a character through several kinds of interactions, and you can see their successes as well as their failures, which in any client environment you would not typically see. Another thing for those of you who are following behavior change issues is it's really clear that humans are kind of hardwired to remember stories. So memory research, eyewitness testimony research, all of those areas of research are converging on that people are wired to remember through a story. So when you're using a movie to teach a concept, it provides another way of aiding students in remembering a story, and then they can tag the concept that you were talking about to how that story played out. We also know that emotions are important to engage, and movies are designed to engage emotion. The more emotional the content, the better it's remembered. And also, the examples in movies, how the characters are portrayed, tends to be a much richer kind of experience than what would be available through a case or other kind of written media, and also tends to be more holistically, like you get the good and the bad, whereas if I take students out to a client site, I'm typically only seeing the good side of the folks that are there. Some challenges. Sometimes students complain about cost. The movies I tend to recommend are not new release movies. And for what it's worth, students seem to enjoy watching old movies, which I have been surprised by. Many movies are available freely, either through some online resource, which you have to be careful of using for copyright infringement reasons. But the university also has a service called Avalon, where if you own the movie, you can send it to the library folks, and they will make it available streaming to the students in your class. Now, it's only available for those students in your class because that copyrighted work is being used for educational purposes. It is not there in perpetuity, but it can be made available at no cost, and they have maybe a couple of week turnaround for doing that, 2 to 3 weeks. So that is a good option. Also, the university. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What was the name of that? Avalon?
Avalon, yes.
Avalon.
Oh,
Yes, and if you contact the library folks, they will be happy to connect you with their people who make that available.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
We should probably, Chris, if you're interested, Linda Rich is our liaison for the library, so she could probably help get you connected.
Yep. And know that the next item being time here, I never have students watching the movie during class time. They always watch the movie outside of class time, because I don't want to take class time to allow them to have this richer experience. They need to get that on their own. So again, being mindful of the time you're expecting from students, assigning 3 movies in a week might not be appropriate, given that there's probably lots of supplemental stuff you're going to ask them to do with that movie. And then relevance. So either you have to provide some materials to help students make that link, or you have to carefully curate the movie to match whatever your course content is that you're providing, so that relevance is maintained. And sometimes movies just get out of date or whatever. In my experience, even movies that are out of date, it becomes kind of fun for the students to see how it used to be if you have real young students, or if we're in a face-to-face class, which hopefully someday we will be again. It allows for some joking and, testifying of back in the day kind of conversations that can, again, enhance engagement in the classroom. So the types of movies I personally love nonfiction of all kinds. So I tend to favor documentaries, but fiction can absolutely be appropriate. I use individually produced, like internet provider kind of things. My sons are huge consumers of YouTube videos, and they have made several items that I wouldn't maybe have come across on my own, but they've made them aware to me. Major production movies can also be useful. It just depends. Most of all, you need to love the movie, because the students tend to take their cue from you when they're deciding how important or how interesting the movie is. So what movies do I use? I use several of the episodes from The Men Who Made America. That was produced by the History Channel, and that's one that Avalon is making available for my students. I use a show called Bigger Than Enron as well as The Smartest Guys in the Room. So Frontline created Bigger Than Enron, which addresses all the corporate scandals of the early 2000s. For fiction, Star Trek is always a great testament for leadership and judgment under uncertainty. 12 Angry Men is a unique one because there is a 1950s version in black and white, but there was also a remake of that movie. And I'll often get students, because the script is essentially the same, I'll have students who watch both the old version and the new version, and they enjoy comparing. In the older version, it was an Italian American that was viewed as the other. And in the new version, it is a Hispanic American that is viewed as the other, and how times have changed, and we are able to discuss diversity issues, ethics, and so forth. Crash is one of my very favorites to use, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Online content providers are also a great resource. They love, love, love to talk about other online kinds of folks. So you may or may not know about Todd Howard. He is a mogul in the computer gaming world. Fallout 76 and the whole Fallout series of online games is what his company has produced. He has a very interesting story about how he came to be, and lots of YouTubers enjoy documenting his successes and failures. So that's also a great one to use. In terms of logistics, so BG owns or can get you more movies than you think. Avalon's a great service. There's another streaming service that the university owns. There's a variety of ways to go about that. One thing I didn't expect when I started doing this is sometimes students just watch the wrong movie and then were baffled, right? And I was baffled that they would get it wrong. But, you know, students just remember the name slightly differently. They think they found it. They think they found it for free. That's what they're watching. So being real careful of providing links and testing the links before class is a good idea. Providing character and actor lists so they kind of know what to look for in the movie is a good idea as well. It also helps them to make sure when they're discussing the movie in class or responding to it in a graded assignment that they're getting the name of the character or can refer to the actor correctly. Another thing I do is over here in pedagogy, I provide a list of ideas to watch for. And I'm going to show you, if I can here, one moment while I share this. Whoops. Okay, I need to share more content. Okay, here we go. And share. So you should be looking at an example of a handout now, at least I hope you are. Yes? Okay, great. So this is a handout. I kind of mishmashed together some handouts that I have used with the movie Crash. Are you all familiar with Crash as a movie? It has, okay. So Brendan Fraser is in it, Thandie Newton is in it, Sandra Bullock is in it. It was an Academy Award winner back from 2004. And there are several stories of characters in a range of life situations and employment situations and political situations, and how they intertwine through the course of a couple of days in this movie. And it is really a rich source for human interaction at work, not at work, how reinforcement histories impact you, judgment, all kinds of stuff. I think I even threw in a stat question at the bottom. So typically what I do, and I don't have these asterisk sections in what I give to the students, but I try and create some icebreaker stuff. So they get started talking, and in the case of Crash, the movie never is overt with it, but it kind of suggests that Brendan Fraser's character might be having an affair. So it's always fun for the students to see who caught it, who didn't catch it, what they think the evidence for him having an affair is, and so forth. So that gets them talking. Then switching, kind of a point of the movie is everyone isn't wholly evil or wholly good. So I ask them, you know, what do you think? Where are the people? And again, trying to get them drawn in. And then I can pivot to, you know, talking about specific concepts. So if I'm discussing organization behavior, reinforcement is always an important part of that. Talking about personality theory is an important part of that, and how do you see personalities play out? How do you see reinforcement play out? How do you see the dynamic interaction between the people and their personalities and their relationships playing out under different circumstances? Provides a lot of opportunity to discuss issues. Tony Danza is another character there. We can talk about judgment biases and prejudice, stereotypes with that. Gathering examples from a film of reinforcement or punishment, for example. Those are often difficult for students to distinguish between. So trying to get that with examples from the film. Attribution theory is down here, consistency, consensus, distinctiveness. That is also a very hard concept, and using those three to address attribution theory tends to be very difficult for students. So trying to get them to apply it within the context of a movie, in this case for Matt Dillon, is very helpful to add to their list of examples and enhance their understanding. So here, addressing memory and judgment and emotions. So there is an important portion of the movie, and I won't spoil it for those of you who haven't seen the movie, but Michael Pena has an emotional event. How would it affect his behavior going forward? Here talking about diversity, racism, and so forth. Trying to get them to take a couple of points of view. So provide some argument that Sandra Bullock is racist, now counter the argument, because the movie provides lots of rich examples of both. So trying to get them to dig for those kind of examples to prevent multiple points of view is something I really like to do. Then moving on with a little bit of the lean material that I teach, as well as operations or supply chain information that I teach, talking about situation awareness theory and how Don Cheadle's character might have gotten a surprise when he didn't understand the full situation. And then beautifully, Brendan Fraser is responding to some survey data in the movie as well. And I get to talk about the importance of stratified random sampling with that as well. So trying to keep weaving ideas throughout students' business or other applied, but work-life kinds of topics throughout their education is something I get to do when I can use movies to teach. So I will stop sharing that and let me go back to, okay. Here we go. And sharing, great. So that kind of handout that we just looked at would be essentially my thing that I give them before they watch the movie, and then they'll bring it back into class as their ideas to watch for, so that they can follow along and have some idea of the kinds of things that I'll ask them about. If you don't provide that kind of scaffolding structure to them, just like every other time they've watched a movie, they just kind of get swept away in the emotion and the experience of it. So providing something that walks them through how you're using the movie is a really important thing to help them. I also tend to include an online quiz. I don't use these kind of movie quizzes, at least in a face-to-face class. And I mix it up a little between specific things about the movie, you know, which character was it, you know, in a multiple choice kind of format that did X in the movie. Not very many of those, just 2 or 3 in a quiz, just to make sure they actually watched it. And then I have another, you know, 4 to 5 questions that ask, you know, how would you see, is this situation from the movie an example of reinforcement or punishment or something like that. As far as tests, I do use the movies in the tests, but I don't make it so that they're reciting pieces of the test or of the movie. Rather, I make it so that I refer, like in an essay question in particular, in the scene where X, Y, and Z happened, create an argument for them using situation awareness theory. And so they can use the movie as their example, which helps in grading right? Because students aren't all over the place with different examples. You know the example and you can follow it and evaluate whether they're able to think critically about that situation. And then, of course, there's discussion, and that discussion can happen in class in a face-to-face environment or online, either which way. It just depends on how you want to handle it. Whether you need the discussion or not just depends on your particular approach to teaching. I particularly like using it in face-to-face. In the online environment, after they have the ideas to look for and take the quiz and maybe see it on a test, it can be useful or not useful. It just depends on you and what you want to do with your class. There is a fair amount of research on using movies. Here's some selected items. One thing you'll notice in the research that's out there is that cross-cultural kinds of issues it can help with as well. So to the extent that you're addressing teamwork in an international context, or trade in an international context, or strategy, you may be able to show using a movie some of the different cultural differences that you wouldn't necessarily be able to allow students to observe unless you had an international trip as part of the curriculum requirement or whatever. So there's lots of ways that the movies can really enhance teaching and enhance learning for students, as well as making the whole teaching experience more fun for you and for them. All right, that's what I have to share. I'd be happy to talk about other movies I use or whatever you would like to discuss.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll jump in real quick here.
Yeah.
You mentioned like frontline videos and stuff. I watch that still. I used to have just basic cable when back 15 years ago when Crash came out. So I'd watch a lot of PBS, and I'm getting back into that with COVID. I turned off all my, and there's no sports anymore. So I canceled all my ESPN and stuff like that. So I'm back to watching PBS. So how can I get those videos? I mean, I don't own that. I mean,
yeah.
Does the library probably have that?
Sometimes the library can get access to them for you. Just so that I don't lose my mind, I have purchased some of them, and you can buy them from PBS. I've used development money or just my own money, depending on.
That's a good idea. I got development money now,
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to keep myself sane, I sometimes like to have more control over where it's coming from, because the links are always can be crazy.
You can always find YouTube stuff, but not a whole movie, and that's probably not ethical to like even provide a link, even if it exists for something that's,
Right.
Well, Chris, WBGU TV is PBS, so
yeah, that's why. Yeah, another thing.
Contact the TV station to see how they have that streaming service that you can get into your classrooms.
Yeah.
So I think it used to be called closed circuit television, and now I think it's something television services. So call over the TV station, and I bet they would be able to make those frontline.
Yeah. I just mentioned Enron in my grad class yesterday. These grad students are probably 25, 20, but Enron was 19 years ago. So I mentioned that in passing. I was talking about how I always try to bring current events. It's not all that current. So for these people, they have probably no idea what I was talking about. So if I let them watch the Enron movie and made that part, sometimes I wasn't even planning to talk about Enron. It just comes in my head, So it's like, I say stuff like that, and I don't know if students are like, what the hell is he talking about?
Well, it's true. And, for better or worse, there are more than a few of us that have been around a while. So I have found from students that it's comforting to them, as well as I experience it to be comforting, to show them how for hundreds of years business has been crazy, and there's fraud and illegal activity, and
politics
we all survive.
Yes, and pandemics and politics. Everything just kind of come all together here in 2020. I'll say though.
No doubt.
I'm old enough to remember Crash because and I watched it again during COVID here. So I rewatched it for the first time in 15 years in like April. Because it was the time, Academy Awards are coming out, and it's kind of on the list of those not worthy winners. You know what I'm saying? Because Brokeback Mountain was the one that was like, oh, that one's definitely going to win. And it was a shock when Crash won. I really like Crash too, but still to this day, I'm like, yeah, it shouldn't have won. So I watched it again to see, was it really that bad, or was it really worthy? And I think it's worthy. So it was justified. But I'm surprised my son, I'll ask him, have you seen this movie? He goes, yeah, I watched it. I'm like, when? I've never seen you watch that. Like, so kids actually like to watch movies from like 20, 30 years ago. My son watched Argo, another award winner from like 2012. He goes, that sucked. I don't know why that would win. the Iran rescue hostage movie.
Right. Right. Well, they love Ben Affleck, right? So there you go.
Yeah, he didn't like the movie though. He thought this is, first of all, the pace is just
Slow.
From the 80s movies or even the 60s. I try to go back, watch movies that my parents would like Dr. Zhivago, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so slow.
Yeah.
The pace just accelerates every year.
And so, for example, that pace of the movie. So 12 Angry Men, the pace always bugs students. Yeah. And I just tell them, buckle up, because this is the way it is. I really do. Because how people behave and what they're going to encounter at work, it plays out at that kind of pace. So being able to follow along and watch the different characters, and there's so many rich interactions and the motivations you don't see. And I really find that, it helps so much to get students to try and take another's perspective at work, and why transformational leadership is a good idea, where you're encouraging people to strive for their best, where you're being motivational, you're ignoring their nonsense kind of thing. So yes, I even make students watch the documentaries with subtitles, so they can just figure that out as well. And they don't always like it, and I've decided that's okay. But China Blue is a movie that I use from 2007, and it's a documentary of Chinese workers in a denim factory, and it's subtitled, which I didn't even realize when I first watched it. Like, I didn't remember that there were subtitles because I enjoyed it so much, I just skipped right over that. But to have kind of a firsthand look at real people working in a real denim factory, really in Hunan province, that's the best way to see it. So. And they come along, and I'm always surprised. There's several students who enjoy it and a few students who don't, and the rest are all just kind of bobbing along. And, the starfish, right? You catch as many as you can and try to keep throwing them back and hope for the best. But having a mix of movies like that kind of allows enough people, the history buffs, the people who tolerate your documentaries, and the people who like more popular kind of films, everyone gets something.
Yeah, I love the idea. I guess I'm not kicking myself like, why didn't I think of this before? Because I post like little 2-minute snippet, clips, and lots of links to articles that someone would have to read, and they're probably not reading it. So I just got done teaching inventory modeling, and I always use the football factory down in Ada. And there's a couple of video clips that just show that operation. So I start class with like a 2-minute video just to like, okay, this is what we're talking about, and then last year, Sports Illustrated had a big profile 5-page article that, talked about how football is made and where where that leather comes from. It was profiling a farmer in Ohio. And so my MBA student, when I mentioned this in class, she goes, oh, that's my uncle. I'm like, oh my cow. And cool. It's pretty gross how a cow turns into maybe one football on average. So most of those footballs get rejected.
Wow. But to have that person testify, in my experience, will hook the rest of the class in. Like,
personal now. Real. Yeah, we're talking about some boring inventory problem, but now,
right.
At least they take away that, okay, this is real life operations. This is real stuff that people do.
Right. And since I've been teaching in the DODC program, and looking more at that whole behavior change issue, you really have to have an emotional response if you want to get it to stick. And movies are designed to do that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I got to run though, so I was dominating the talk because I know I have to leave. So thank you very much, Michelle. That was awesome.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else have a question for Michelle?
A comment and a question. Michelle, I appreciated your comment about recognizing the amount of time we're expecting outside of class when we do assign movies along with a lot of other assignments and preparation for course. And I had an experience this semester. It worked out really well. I was showing Becoming Warren Buffett documentary.
Oh.
And it wasn't due yet, but I asked the class if anyone had watched it. And a student spoke up and said, yes, he had watched it. He said, initially, I was really mad when I saw how long it was. It was an hour and a half. And he goes, but then I watched it. He goes, and it was really good. Yeah. And he started talking about it. And so that excited the rest of the class. Yeah. But I thought, wow, that was an hour and a half. That was to him more than what he expected he should have to do outside of class with the other things. So yeah, we need to keep that in mind.
And just for the record, I have gotten more pushback in the last year on the length of movies than I ever have. So I really think that the whole, generational issue of you expect me to focus for an hour and a half kind of thing is something that we're running up against. Although I don't know how many of you were able to read a nonfiction book called Deep Work and how important it is to try and practice that concentration. If you can't concentrate in the context of a movie for an hour and a half, then your ability to concentrate, period, needs a whole lot of work. So I just tell them that now, like, you need to be able to focus your mind, and I'm helping you.
My question is technical. Thank you for sharing that Avalon resource with us. So when you do that, are the students, does the library set that up through Canvas, or do they send a link? How
they
is
send
it
a link. They send a link that then I send to the students. And the students log on. They must use their BG email to connect, because it's that ID that the library uses to match the students. But yeah, they'll get a link.
Oh, that's so helpful, because I'm always trying to search around, trying to find how am I going to give them access to this.
Right. And always frustrating. Just you have to leave enough lead time for them to get that together. And remember that, I often use one movie for a couple of classes. So making sure you've got that updated of I'm using it for this class and for this class, and all the names and everything all jive. That can.
Okay, I'm going to give that a try.
Great.
Any other questions for Michelle?
No, I just want to say along those lines. So I just want to say along those lines, I was there. I have an app that I use. I mean, just for my own personal use. It's called Just Watch, and I'm sure, and there are other sources like that you search for a movie and it do what streaming system. So like I just looked up. I might be cutting out. I looked up Crash, and it's available on HBO. So I mean, so obviously I don't have access to that, but type it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Canopy or whatever it happens to be. It's called Just Watch.
Okay, that's good to know. And I'm always surprised by the number of students who have some streaming service. So often, even if you make the movie available, they'll find it in another medium that they choose. So
yeah, virtually. When I have a show of hands, virtually everyone in the class, when I say, do you have Netflix? Virtually everyone raises their hand.
Right.
I had a student approach me after class yesterday. We were talking about the Wells Fargo scandal, and they had watched a short 20-minute documentary on it. And he came up after class and he said, I just watched this movie. Have you ever seen it? And he told me the movie and explained it. And he's like, it was really good. It fits in with everything we've been talking about. I'm like, awesome. Thank you. So I'm like, I'm going to watch it this weekend. And now I know how I can have everyone else access. So wow, just thank you for this, straightforward and practical approach to how we can use the movies.
My pleasure.
Well, if there are no other questions, we want to thank Michelle for presenting today, and thank you, Kristen, for organizing these. What we plan to do is one a month. So Kristen is working on next month's. It's going to be with Karen Ebach, I believe. So thank you all very much. And I'm sure that if you continue to have questions, Michelle would be happy to field those questions via email. So thank you all for coming today. And we thank Michelle for
Thank you,
taking the
Michelle.
time to share her best practice, which I think it was incredible information. Very good. Thank you so much.
Ready. My pleasure.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.